What is it about mummies that have captured our imaginations for over a century? Is it the mystery, the supposedly buried treasures surrounding them, or maybe just the spooky connotations of an ancient curse? In this episode of Doc TV's monster horror documentary series, we'll examine every exciting detail of unwrapping the mummy. What is a mummy? A mummy is a deceased person or an animal whose soft tissues and organs have been preserved by an accidental or intentional exposure to chemicals, very low humidity, extreme cold, or absence of oxygen, so that the recovered corpse does not deteriorate further if held in dry and cool conditions. Some authorities prohibit using the term to describe bodies intentionally embalmed with chemicals, but using the word to cover accidentally desiccated bodies goes back to at least 1615 AD. Mummies of people and animals have been discovered on every continent, both due to natural preservation through abnormal conditions and as cultural artifacts. Over 1 million animal mummies have been located in Egypt, including cats. Many Egyptian animal mummies are sacred ibis, and radiocarbon dating indicates the Egyptian ibis mummies that have been studied were from a time frame that falls between around 450 and 250 BC. In addition to the mummies of ancient Egypt, intentional mummification was a feature of many ancient cultures in regions of Asia and America with dry climates. In North America, the spirit cave mummies of Fallon, Nevada, were accurately dated at more than 9,400 years old. Before this find, the oldest known intentional mummy was a child, one of the Chinchorro mummies discovered in the Cameroons Valley, Shala, which dates around 5050 BC. The oldest known innately mummified human corpse is a severed head dated 6,000 years old, found in 1936 AD at the site named Inca Cueva No. 4 in South America. While interest in the analysis of mummies dates back to Ptolemaic Greece, the most structured scientific examination started at the beginning of the 20th century. Before this, many rediscovered mummies were marketed as curiosities, or for use in pseudoscientific novelties like Mumia. The first contemporary scientific study of mummies started in 1901. Guided by professors at the English Language Government School of Medicine in Cairo, Egypt. The first X-ray of mummy came in 1903 when Professors Graft and Elliott Smith and Howard Carter operated the only X-ray machine in Cairo at the time to inspect the mummified body of Thutmose IV. British chemist Alfred Lucas used chemical analyses on Egyptian mummies during this same time, which produced many results about the types of substances used in embalming. Lucas also made noteworthy contributions to the study of Tutankhamun in 1922. Pathological examination of mummies saw inconsistent levels of popularity throughout the 20th century. In 1992, the first World Congress on Mummy Studies was held in Puerto de la Cruz on Tenerife in the Canary Islands. More than 300 scientists attended the Congress to disseminate nearly 100 years of accumulated information on mummies. The data offered at the meeting initiated a new wave of interest in the topic. One of the major developments was combining biomedical and bioarchaeological data on mummies with current databases. This was impossible before Congress due to the distinctive and highly specialized methods needed to gather such information. In recent years, CT scanning has become an invaluable agent in mummification by permitting researchers to digitally unwrap mummies without threatening bodily damage. The level of detail in such scans is so complex that small linens used in tiny places, like the nostrils, can be digitally rebuilt in 3D. Such modeling has been employed to complete digital autopsies on mummies to decide the cause of death and lifestyle, like in the case of Tutankhamun. What types of mummies are there? Mummies are generally split into two distinct categories: spontaneous and anthropogenic. The living deliberately created anthropogenic mummies for multiple reasons, the most typical for spiritual purposes. Spontaneous mummies, such as Otzi, were created unintentionally because of natural conditions like dry cold, or heat, or anaerobic or acidic conditions like those in bogs. While most individual mummies solely belong to one category or the other, examples of both types are linked to a single culture. like those from the Andean cultures of South America or the ancient Egyptian culture. Some of the later well-preserved remains of the mummification were found under Christian churches, like the mummified vicar Nicholas Rungius discovered under the St. Michael Church in Kiminma, Finland. Until lately, it was thought that the earliest ancient Egyptian mummies were completed intrinsically because of the environment in which they were buried. In 2014, an 11-year study by the University of Oxford, the University of York, and Macquarie University indicated that artificial mummification occurred 1,500 years earlier than first believed. This was ratified in 2018 when tests on a 5,600-year-old mummy in Turin indicated that it had been deliberately mummified utilizing linen wrappings and embalming greases made from aromatic plant extracts and conifer resin. The preservation of the deceased had a strong effect on ancient Egyptian religion. Mummification was an essential part of the rituals for the dead starting as early as the Second Dynasty, about 2800 BC. Egyptians saw preserving the body after death as necessary for living well in the hereafter. As Egypt achieved more prosperity, burial rituals became a status symbol for the rich. This cultural hierarchy led to ornate tombs and more advanced embalming techniques. By the Fourth Dynasty, about 2600 BC, Egyptian embalmers started to achieve true mummification through evisceration. Much of this early experimentation with mummification in Egypt is unknown. How is a mummy made? The few manuscripts directly depicting the mummification procedure date to the Greco-Roman period. Most surviving papyri only outline the ceremonial practices involved in embalming, not the surgical procedures applied. A text known as the Ritual of Embalming does clarify some of the practical logistics of embalming. However, there are only 2 known copies, and each is incomplete. With regards to mummification shown in images, there are also very few. The tomb of Che, designated TT23, is one of only 2 known to offer the wrapping of a mummy. Another text explaining the processes used in the latter eras is Herodotus' Histories. Written in Book 2 of the Histories is one of the most thorough reports of the Egyptian mummification procedure, including using natron to dehydrate remains for preservation. However, these reports are short and somewhat vague, leaving intellectuals to presume most of the methods used by studying mummies that have been unearthed. By using current refinements in technology, scientists have uncovered a superabundance of new details about the methods employed in mummification. A series of CT scans conducted on a 2,400-year-old mummy in 2008 showed an instrument left inside the skull's cranial cavity. The tool was a rod made of an organic material used to bust apart the brain and let it empty out of the nose. This finding helped to dispel the assertion within Herodotus' works that the rod had been a hook constructed of iron. Earlier experimentation in 1994 by investigators Ronald Wade and Bob Breyer backed these conclusions. While trying to replicate Egyptian mummification, Wade and Breyer found that extracting the brain was much more manageable when the brain was liquefied and allowed to drain with the help of gravity, as opposed to pulling the organ out piece by piece with a tool. Through various study methods over many decades, contemporary Egyptologists now comprehend how mummification was performed in ancient Egypt. The first and most important action was to stop the decomposition function by extracting the internal organs and washing the body with palm wine and spices. The only organ left behind was the heart, as the ceremonials believed the heart was the center of thought and feeling and would, consequently, still be required in the afterlife. After washing, the corpse was dried out with natron inside the empty body cavity and outside on the skin. The internal organs were also dried and either sealed in individual jars or wrapped to be returned to the corpse. This process generally took 40 days. After dehydration, the mummy was wrapped in numerous layers of linen cloth. Egyptian priests put small amulets within the layers to guard the decedent against evil. Once the mummy was wrapped entirely, it was covered in resin to bypass the danger of damp air. The resin was also spread onto the sarcophagus to seal it. The mummy was then locked within its crypt, alongside the material goods believed to help aid it in the hereafter. Aspergillus niger, a robust fungus adept at surviving in diverse conditions, has been discovered in the mummies of ancient Egyptian crypts and can be inhaled when disturbed. Mummification is one of the defining traditions in ancient Egyptian culture for people today. Maintaining the human body is a fantastic element of Egyptian life. Yet, even mummification has a history of development and was available to different ranks of society in different ways during various times. There were at least 3 other methods of mummification, according to Herodotus. They range from the most perfect to the technique employed by the poorer classes. The most expensive process was to preserve the body by dehydration and defend against nuisances like bugs. Nearly all of the actions Herodotus related served one of these 2 roles. First, the brain was extracted from the skull through the nose. The gray matter was dumped. Modern mummy excavations have shown that instead of an iron hook inserted through the nose, as Herodotus claims, a rod was used to scramble the brain through the skull, which drained out the nose by gravity. The embalmers then flushed the head with certain drugs that mostly cleared any brain tissue residue and killed bacteria. Next, the embalmers cut the flank with a sharp blade created from an Ethiopian stone and cleared the stomach contents. According to archaeological proof, Herodotus does not discuss the separate preservation of these organs and their arrangement either in individual jars or back in the cavity, a process that was part of the most expensive embalming. The abdominal cavity was then flushed with palm wine and an infusion of crushed, fragrant herbs and spices. The cavity was then filled with spices including cassia, myrrh, and Herodotus notes, every other sort of spice except frankincense, also to preserve the body. The corpse was dehydrated for 70 days by placing it in natron, a naturally ensuing salt. Herodotus urges that the body not stay in the natron beyond 70 days. Any shorter time, and the body is not wholly dehydrated. Any longer, the body is too rigid to move into position for wrapping. The embalmers then rewashed the body and covered it with linen dressings. The bandages were covered with gum, which modern research has shown is an antimicrobial agent and waterproofing. At this point, the corpse was given back to the family. These perfect mummies were then put in human-shaped wooden compartments. Richer people set these wooden boxes in stone sarcophagi that delivered further safeguard. According to Herodotus, the family established the sarcophagus upright against the wall in the tomb. The second process that Herodotus relates was employed by middle-class people or people who wished to avoid expense. In this process, an oil derived from cedar trees was injected with a needle into the stomach. A rectal plug stopped the oil from exiting. This oil presumably had the dual objective of liquefying the internal organs and disinfecting the abdominal cavity. The family bypassed the cost of canopic jars and separate preservation by liquefying the organs. The body was then placed in natron for 70 days. The body was withdrawn at the end of this time, and the cedar oil, now including the liquefied organs, was emptied through the rectum. With the body dehydrated, it could be returned to the relative. Herodotus does not convey the burial method of such mummies, but they were possibly placed in a shaft tomb. More impoverished people used coffins made from terracotta. The embalmer's third and least expensive method was to remove the intestines with an unnamed fluid injected as an enema. The body was put in natron for 70 days and returned to the relatives. Herodotus provides no other details. Do mummification differ in other cultures? In addition to the mummies of Egypt, there have been examples of mummies being found in other regions of the African continent. The bodies exhibit a combination of spontaneous mummification and anthropogenic, some being thousands of years old. Canary Islands. The mummies of the Canary Islands belong to the indigenous Guanche individuals and date the time before 14th century Spanish explorers settled in the area. All dead individuals within the Guanche culture were mummified during this period, though the care taken with embalming and entombment differed depending on their social status. Embalming was carried out by specialized groups, organized according to gender, and considered unclean by the rest of the community. The methods for embalming were comparable to those of the ancient Egyptians, involving evisceration, preservation, and packing of the vacated bodily cavities, then covering the body in animal skins. Despite the successful methods employed by the Guanche, very few mummies remain due to looting and desecration. Libya. The mummified remains of a baby were found during an excursion by archaeologist Fabrizio Mori to Libya during the winter of 1958 to 1959 in the natural cave structure of Uan Muhajig. After strange residues and cave paintings were found on the cave's exteriors, expedition authorities chose to unearth them. Revealed alongside fragmented animal bone instruments was the mummified body of an infant, wrapped in animal skin and wearing a necklace made of ostrich eggshell beads. Professor Tangiorgi of the University of Pisa radiocarbon dated infants between 5,000 and 8,000 years old. A long incision on the right abdominal wall and the lack of internal organs revealed that the body had been eviscerated post-mortem, possibly to preserve the remains. A load of herbs discovered within the body cavity also reinforced this determination. Further research showed that the child had been around 30 months old at the time of death, though gender could not be determined due to poor preservation of the sex organs. South Africa. The first mummy to be found in South Africa was located in the Baviaanskloof wilderness area by Dr. Johan Binneman in 1999. Nicknamed Moses, the mummy was assessed to be around 2,000 years old. After being linked to the indigenous Khoi civilization of the area, the National Council of Khoi Chiefs of South Africa started to make legal requests that the mummy is returned soon after the body was transferred to the Albany Museum in Grahamstown. Asia. The mummies of Asia are usually believed to be accidental. The descendants were buried in the right place where the environment could serve as a mechanism for preservation. This is especially common in the desert areas of Iran and the Tarim Basin. Mummies have been located in more humid Asian regions. However, these are subject to immediate decay after being extracted from the crypt. China. Mummies from different dynasties throughout China's past have been located in several locations. They are almost solely thought to be unintentional mummifications. Due to their moist, warm climates, many places where mummies have been discovered are challenging to preserve. This makes the retrieval of mummies hard, as exposure to the outside world can push the bodies to decompose in hours. An instance of a Chinese mummy that was preserved despite being entombed in surroundings not facilitative to mummification is Stin Jui. Also known as Lady Dai, she was found in the early 1970s at the Mawandui archaeological site in Changsha. She was the wife of the Marquis of Dai during the Han Dynasty, who was also interred with her alongside another young man, often assumed to be a very close relative. However, Sin Ju's body was the only one of the three to be mummified. Her remains were so well preserved that Hunan Provincial Medical Institute surgeons could conduct an autopsy. The actual reason her body was so thoroughly preserved has yet to be determined. Among the mummies located in China are those termed Tarim mummies because of their discovery in the Tarim Basin. The desert conditions of the basin proved to be an ideal agent for desiccation. For this reason, over 200 Tarim mummies, over 4,000 years old, were exhumed from a graveyard in the present-day Xinjiang province. The mummies were discovered buried in upside-down boats with hundreds of 13-foot-long wooden stakes in the place of tombstones. DNA sequence data indicates that the mummies had haplogroup R1a or Y-DNA, distinctive of Western Eurasia and East Central Europe, Central Asia, and the Indus Valley. This has triggered a commotion among the Turkic-speaking Uyghur residents, who contend the site has always belonged to their culture. It was not until the 10th century that the Uyghurs were said by scholars to have progressed to the region from Central Asia. American sinologist Victor H. Mayer claims that the earliest mummies in the Tarim Basin were exclusively Caucasoid or Europoid, with East Asian migrants arriving in the eastern portions of the Tarim Basin around 3,000 years ago. At the same time, Mayer also notes that it was not until 842 that the Uyghur people settled in the area. Additional mummified remains have been retrieved from around the Tarim Basin at locations including Yangtai, Korikal, Shenjindian, Zaghanluk, Kizilchoka, and Shanpula or Sample. As of 2012, at least 8 mummified human remains have been retrieved from the Dazlak salt mine at Cher Abad in northwestern Iran. Due to their salt preservation, these bodies have been collectively dubbed the Saltmen. Carbon-14 testing performed in 2008 dated 3 of the bodies to around 400 BC. Later isotopic analysis on the other mummies produced similar dates. However, many of these corpses were discovered in an area not closely linked to the mine. During this period, investigators decided the mine suffered a major collapse, which probably caused the demise of the miners. Since meaningful archaeological details reveal the area was not actively occupied during this time, current consensus maintains that the accident happened during a short period of interim mining activity. Siberia. In 1993, a group of Russian archaeologists led by Dr. Natalia Polosmik uncovered the Siberian Ice Maiden, a Scytho-Siberian woman, on the Yukok Plateau in the Altai Mountains near the Mongolian border. The mummy was naturally frozen because of the extreme climatic conditions of the Siberian steppe. Also known as Princess Yukok, the mummy wore intricately detailed clothes, an ornate headdress, and jewelry. Next to her body were buried 6 adorned horses and a symbolic feast for her final pilgrimage. Her left hand and arm were tattooed with animal-style formations, including a stylized deer. The Ice Maiden has been the basis of some current debate. The mummy's skin has slightly decayed, and the tattoos have faded since the unearthing. Some inhabitants of the Altai Republic, created after the breakup of the Soviet Union, have demanded the recovery of the Ice Maiden, which is presently held in Novosibirsk in Siberia. Another Siberian mummy, a man, was found much earlier in 1929. His skin was also covered with tattoos of 2 monsters resembling griffins, which adorned his chest, and 3 somewhat destroyed images representing 2 deer and a mountain goat on his left arm. Philippines. Philippine mummies are known as Kabayan mummies. They are standard in Igorot culture and their lineage. The mummies are located in Sagada, Kabayan, and elsewhere. The mummies are dated between the 14th and 19th centuries. Europe. The European continent has an eclectic scope of anthropogenic and spontaneous mummies. Some of the best preserved corpses have come from bogs found across the area. The Capuchin monks that settled the area left hundreds of intentionally preserved bodies that have delivered insight into the traditions and civilizations of people from diverse periods. One of the oldest mummies, nicknamed Otzi, was located on this continent. New mummies continued to be found in Europe well into the 21st century. Bog bodies. Ireland, Great Britain, Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Denmark have produced many bog bodies, mummies of people located in sphagnum bogs, seemingly due to murder or ritual sacrifices. In such circumstances, the acidity of the water, low temperature, and lack of oxygen are incorporated with the tanning of the body's skin and soft tissues. The skeleton typically disintegrates over time. Bog bodies are remarkably well preserved on extraction from the bog, with skin and internal organs intact. It is conceivable to discern the decedent's last meal by analyzing stomach contents. The Harold Scare woman was found by laborers in a bog in Jutland in 1835. She was incorrectly identified as an early medieval Danish queen. Because of this, she was placed in a royal casket at the St. Nikolai Church, Vejle, where she currently resides. Another bog body from Denmark, known as the Tolland Man, was discovered in 1950. The corpse was revered for its excellent facial and appendage preservation, which seemed like the man had recently died. Only the head of Tolland Man remains because of the decomposition of the rest of his body, which was not preserved along with the head. Czech Republic. The majority of mummies found in the Czech Republic come from underground tombs. While there is some proof of intentional mummification, most authorities state that desiccation transpired naturally due to unique conditions within the crypts. The Capuchin crypt in Brno includes 300 years of mummified remains directly under the central altar. Beginning in the 18th century when the tomb was unlocked, and continuing until the practice was stopped in 1787, the Capuchin friars of the monastery would lay the dead on a buffer of bricks. The crypt's distinctive air quality and topsoil naturally preserved the bodies. Approximately 50 mummies were located in an abandoned tomb beneath the church of St. Procopius of Sozava in Bamberg in the mid-1980s. Workers excavating a trench accidentally smashed into the crypt, which started to fill with wastewater. The mummies quickly started to decay, though 34 could be saved and held temporarily at the District Museum of the Orlice Mountains until they could be returned to the monastery in 2000. The mummies vary in social status and age at the time of demise, with at least 2 children and 1 priest. The Klatovy catacombs accommodate an array of Jesuit mummies next to some aristocrats. In the early 1930s, the mummies were accidentally damaged during restorations, resulting in the loss of 140 bodies. The newly revised airing system preserves the 38 bodies currently on display. Denmark. Besides several bog bodies, Denmark has also produced several other bodies, like the 3 Borum Eshoj mummies, the Egtvgirl, and the Skridstrup woman, discovered inside burial mounds or tumuli. In 1874, the Borum Eshoj grave mound was exhumed, constructed around 3 caskets belonging to a middle-aged man and woman and a man in his early 20s. The woman was found to be around 50 to 60 years old through investigation. She was discovered with several artifacts made of bronze, consisting of a belt plate, buttons, and rings, indicating she was of a higher echelon. Farmers dug through the casket, extracting the hair from the skull. Her actual hairstyle is unknown. The 2 men wore kilts, and the more youthful man wore a sheath with a bronze blade. All 3 mummies were dated 1351 to 1345 BC. Jutland in 1935. Carbon-14 dating revealed that she had died around 1300 BC. The study also showed that she was around 18 to 19 years old and had been interred during the summer. Her hair had been drawn up in an intricate hairstyle, then wrapped by a horsehair hairnet made by the Sprang process. She wore a necklace, 2 golden earrings, and a blouse, indicating she was of a higher class than the average person. The Egtvgirl, dated to 1370 BC, was also inside a sealed casket within a tumulus in 1921. She wore a skirt and a bodice, including bronze bracelets and a belt. Discovered with the girl, at her feet were the cremated remains of a miner, and, by her head, a box holding a hairnet, some bronze pins, and an awl. Hungary. In 1994, 265 mummified corpses were discovered in the tomb of a Dominican church in Vac, Hungary, from the 1729 to 1838. The find proved to be scientifically significant, and by 2006, a collection was established in the Museum of Natural History in Budapest. Unique to the Hungarian mummies are their elaborately trimmed caskets, with no 2 being precisely alike. Italy. Italy's terrain and climatology have led to many cases of spontaneous mummification. Italian mummies show the same type, with a conglomeration of intentional and accidental mummification, distributed across many cultures and centuries. The oldest natural mummy in Europe was found in 1991 in the Ötztal Alps on the Austrian-Italian border. Nicknamed Ötzi, the mummy is a 5,300-year-old male thought to be a member of the Tamins Karasto-Izera cultural group of South Tyrol. Despite his age, a recent DNA analysis by Walter Parson of Innsbruck Medical University indicated Ötzi